The whole world is talking about a 46-year-old American who just a handful of days ago was unknown, even amongst his community, in a place called Minneapolis. But under some very sad circumstances, the name of George Floyd is now known right across the globe. But what many Kenyans and indeed Africans do not know, and indeed some do not want to know, is that the circumstances surrounding George Floyd losing his life affect us all. Oh yes, very much so. Because the truth is, over the last almost 500 years, black lives have not mattered. Folks, let us be brutally honest with ourselves. Black lives have meant nothing right across the globe. And what has actually happened is that this George Floyd incident has brought this issue to the surface, and indeed to the fore. And on today's show, we're going to dissect and analyze this issue of black lives not mattering in great detail, so that you realize the truth, which is, if you have a black skin, your life doesn't matter. And the fact that you may not yet realize it does not change the facts. And sooner or later, one day, you're going to come bang across circumstances where you will realize it. And it may be too late. And what I am saying now is that it is extremely important for you to realize this fact and to take action right now. Because that action is going to protect you and your loved ones going forward. Black lives don't matter in Africa because we have leaders on our continent. In fact, the vast majority of leaders on our continent are held hostage by the West. And so, while we hold them in high esteem, sometimes because they come from our tribe, circumstances are that they must please the West first before they even start thinking about our welfare and what is best for us. And this has come out very, very clearly during this global virus crisis. African countries have been forced into restrictions and lockdowns without stopping even for a second to consider the larger consequences and results of their actions on their people, simply because black lives don't matter. And today, let us not talk about the obvious consequences, like famine, lack of food, economic downturn, etc., etc., people losing their livelihoods. Let's not talk about obvious things. And let's talk about something else, scientific, that institutions like the World Health Organization, if they were genuine, should have advised Africa about. And this touches on our health directly. And it all stems from the following simple fact of life. People with a dark skin, blacks, tend to produce less vitamins D with the very same exposure of sunlight that a black person would have right next to a lighter skinned person. And it is just common sense. You don't need any research to tell you this. And let's just break it down and simplify it so that we all understand what I'm saying. We were born and we live in Africa, where there's a lot of sunlight. And therefore, it makes perfect sense that Almighty God would wire us in such a way that we can be able to withstand that extreme sunlight, literally the year round. And so, when a Muzungu comes to Africa, who needs much less sunlight to be able to generate enough vitamins D in their bodies, they have to be very careful about too much exposure to the African sunlight. Think about it for a moment. If we're exactly the same, then Africans would have the problem, which is also a health risk, of producing too much vitamins D in their bodies. And so the Mzungu comes to Africa during the virus crisis, and he demands that all Africans must go on total lockdown in order to prevent the spread of the virus. But hold on a minute. The truth is, based on what we have said, a fair-skinned Mzungu would have much less problems in a lockdown than a black African, simply because a black African would be much, much more likely to develop a deficiency of this all-important vitamins D, which would have far-reaching negative consequences on the body of a black African. And let us quickly look at some of those negative effects. Lowered immune system, much lower than that of a white man under the same conditions of lockdown. Also, increased risk of death from a cardiovascular disease, fatigue and tiredness, bone and back pain, depression, impaired wound healing, bone loss, hair loss, muscle pain, etc., etc. And so, if we Africans were not slaves to the West, what would have happened is that when the Mzungus would have come with this suggestion, the African leaders would have called in the experts and asked them a simple question. I want to know what would be the impact on our local people of copy-pasting what the West are doing here in Africa. And they would have been told, number one, vitamins D deficiency. And then the African leaders who still wanted to go on a lockdown would have given an advisory to their citizens. Please make sure that you get some sunlight daily, even as you stay at home. Make sure you don't stay inside the house for days on end without any exposure to sunlight. It is important to your health. But of course, that did not happen. That will never happen. And those African leaders who dared to resist what the Mzungu had commanded found themselves in trouble. One of them being the president of Tanzania, President John Pombe Magufuli, and a country called Burundi in East Africa. Burundi even went ahead and had a presidential election. Oh yes, they now have a brand new president. And because the virus is intelligent and the virus hears and then acts appropriately, the virus decided we will teach Burundians a lesson. And indeed, any other cocky African countries that may want to defy our directive. And so, of all the people in Burundi, guess who ends up getting the virus and has to be rushed for treatment in Kenya? The First Lady of Burundi. Black lives don't matter. And that is why people like Bill Gates can come to Africa with a vaccination and vaccinate millions. And many people end up being affected negatively. Children die. Women are unable to conceive. And the rich Mzungu called Bill Gates gets into his private jet and flies back to his country. And nothing, absolutely nothing, happens to him. No consequences. Nobody even dares to ask him what he did to black Africans, because black lives don't matter. if you're not convinced, I have a simple question for you. What do you think would have happened if those vaccinations had been done in a white community? Just answer that one. And indeed, as we continue ranting about this, Africa remains the testing ground for every new dangerous vaccination. Clinical trials must be done on black Africans first. Yeah, because black lives don't matter. And then later, when they have confirmed the negative effects, if any, of the vaccination, they can then be done in the white world. My dear fellow Africans, my voice is breaking as I ask you yet again, please, please, wake up! Oh boy. Please, let the George Floyd manenos be a wake-up call for Africans to wake up from their very deep slumber before it is too late. Now, we must also appreciate something else extremely important. In order for Africans to wake up, we must realize the big hindrance, the big thing blocking us from ever waking up before it is too late. Yeah, and that thing stopping us from ever waking up or ever seeing what is happening, even when it is clearly before our eyes, is something I call in Africa the spirit of colonialism. And in the United States, mostly, I would call it the spirit of slavery. It is extremely important that you understand this spiritual truth. Now, the spirit of colonialism and the spirit of slavery are twins. But there's a slight difference, which I'll come to in a minute. Now, when a spirit attacks a human being, they lose control in that they do things without understanding why they're doing those things. They mess up their lives big time. And they never understand why they're doing what they're doing. But the good news is that 90% healing, oh yes, I said 90%, 90% healing comes to those who have the knowledge, those who realize, what they're fighting. Because you imagine you're in a war and you don't know the enemy you're fighting. You're at a very big disadvantage. But when you not only know the enemy you're fighting, but you know them well, you have a head start. You can begin to get healing. Now, let me just illustrate this, in a simple story of how they control elephants in a circus. When the elephant is young and weak and not yet strong, a rope is used to strap it to the ground so that it cannot escape. And as the young elephant grows, it tries several times to free itself from that bondage. But of course it fails. It's still too young. It still doesn't have strength. And because of the many times it tries to free itself without success, this develops into mental bondage. It is in the mind. It knows, it is convinced it can never escape because it has tried so many times and failed. And this bondage remains as the elephant grows big and very strong. So much so that only a slight nudge from its mighty strength will free itself. But it never attempts. Why? Because it already knows. It tried when it was young. It knows there's no way it can escape. My dear fellow blacks all over the world, that is exactly what the spirit of slavery and colonialism has done to us. Now, let's move to the difference between the spirit of colonialism and the spirit of slavery. A man comes from Kenya. He's black. And indeed, this is a true story for many. Yeah? And this Kenyan manages to make his way to the United States of America. And when they land in the US, they take full advantage of the opportunities they see around them. And within a very short time, they become very prosperous and very successful, despite the fact that they're still carrying with them the spirit of colonialism. Meanwhile, the African American born in the United States of America, an American citizen, with the same opportunities open to them. No, in fact, I'd better correct that. No, the African American with more opportunities because they are born and bred in the United States. They are a citizen of the United States of America. And therefore they have more opportunities than this Kenyan from Black Africa. That African American continues to wallow in poverty, continues to remain in their situation. And they spend most of their time complaining about the lack of opportunity for black people in the United States, which to a certain extent is true. However, how come a Kenyan from Africa came to the United States and did better than them? How did that happen? And yet this Kenyan landed in the US with so many disadvantages. Top on the list is getting the papers to be legal in the United States. And indeed some of them succeed even before they get those papers. I think you get my drift. And any African Americans listening to my show today, please bear with me. I love you and I respect you. And I'm not saying this out of disrespect. I'm just trying to heal a situation for we black people. Because our lives don't matter and we have to do something about it. Now in part 2 of this video, we'll go back to the beginning so that we fully understand the spirit of slavery and the spirit of colonialism that is holding back blacks. You don't want to miss that video. And as soon as it's ready, it'll appear as a link on the top right-hand corner of your screen towards the tail end of this video. And indeed also in the description area below on this video in YouTube. If you come to this video too early, the link may not yet be up. But go away and come back after a few minutes. It'll be up. Until then, this is Chris Kumekucha.